Hello, welcome back everyone after lunch. This feels like a really pertinent topic for after lunch. We're talking to amazing Rachel about veggie meals that your kids will actually eat.
I've just added, for clarity, a little hopefully into my phone.
I find, there's lots of lovely veggie meals that I think, oh yeah, I'd really love that, or I'd really like that. And then my kids are opposite me, so I need to be careful what I say. But you get, oh, I don't like mushrooms, or I don't like this, or I don't like that. And
I hate mushrooms.
Sam says he hates mushrooms. So yeah, and actually, Rachel's written this amazing book, which I'm sure she'll tell us about. And it says it's easy weaning recipes, but my kids are 9 and 11. And we've been doing loads of these recipes, and they've been actually, and they're you said, because you said for all the family to enjoy, and I think that's what it doesn't matter what age your kids are, or whether you've got kids or not. These are all like really accessible, delicious veggie meals. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let Rachel introduce herself properly.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to hand over. Thanks, guys. Just to say, the chat's there on the. Hopefully, everyone's getting used to this now. The chat's there on the right hand side. If you've got specific questions you really want to flag, post them in the ask a question box at the bottom there, and I'll come back to Claire at the end and we'll go through them. But do feel free to chat away in the box and make connections and all those sorts of things. Right. Sorry, Rachel. Over to you.
Thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Rachel and I run Little Veggie Eats, which is mostly on Instagram. And then, as Jen mentioned, I've also just written my first book, which came out in March. And that's easy weaning recipes for all the family to enjoy. I'm going to talk to you today about easy veggie meals your kids will actually eat, with a little caveat of hopefully. So what really is today is just a kind of series of tips and hints of different foods you can do and things which might help your kids eat meals. Now, I'm just going to go over what my main approach is, which is basically I do one meal for all the family. So as Jen mentioned, my book is weaning recipes, but they're for everyone. So what we're going to talk about today is more about how you introduce sort of eating family style into your eating to hopefully get your children eating the same food as you, and how you can make different adaptations as you go to make it appropriate for the whole family, using things like toppings to entice more hesitant eaters and also to max out the nutrition for your family. And then also I'm going to talk a bit about veggie loading, which is something I do. It's not necessarily hiding vegetables, but it's using vegetables to really enhance like flavor and color. And then finally, I'll sort of just brush on a few tips of introducing sort of new flavors in safe environments. So a little bit about me. I'm a lifetime vegetarian, which my parents took the decision in the late 70s to be vegetarian. So I've been always vegetarian and was brought up this way. So it's been completely natural for me to do this, but obviously things have changed loads since then. I've definitely noticed I've been running my Instagram page since 2015, and even when I set it up back then, it kind of felt still a bit of sort of a niche thing to do. And then it was definitely in the last 3 years, I think, as this sort of climate disaster became more into our consciousness. And I think there's been this move away from labels. So what I love about sort of Jen's approach is you don't have to be sort of strictly vegetarian or vegan or strictly plant-based, but there's so many people now just wanting to introduce more sort of veg-focused, plant-based focused foods into their diet without necessarily putting these labels on. So what I'm going to do today is obviously just talk ways you can do that if you maybe are here because you just want to eat more plant-based things, or maybe you're new to it. And perhaps if you haven't sort of given your children sort of a vegetarian focused diet before, you're sort of wondering how that works in practice. And I know already I can see some sort of questions down the side, people saying their kids don't like specific vegetables and stuff. So I think sometimes it can seem a bit of a barrier. So what I'm going to talk, I'll just actually quickly mention as well, like meat replacements, because obviously there are so many different things on the market at the moment, and you walk into the supermarket and there's just feels like there's new things every week. Now, I'm not going to talk too much today about sort of the strict meat replacements, because I think there's a big sort of question mark over how they fit into a sort of sustainability picture in themselves, in terms of the fact they're highly processed, packaging and stuff. But obviously I do use them myself and our family, and we will use them sort of a couple of times a week. But I guess it's more about not necessarily relying on things like this, but cooking things from scratch with lots of sort of vegetables and pulses is really what I'm focusing on today. So starting off, like one meal for all the family, what does this mean in practice? Now, I'm actually going to try and share my screen now so that I can I'm not going to go through slides, but I have got pictures of food, which everyone likes to look at pictures of food, don't they? So I'm just going to work out. Hang on, sorry about this.
Don't worry. It's not the most intuitive platform.
No, it's sorry. I will be, hang on one moment. Going to try and do it now. Sorry about this.
Don't worry, don't worry. There's a couple of comments in the chat. Just Delia said, I couldn't agree more. Always one meal for the all the family, and that's one of the reasons I did baby-led weaning with ours, just because I was too lazy to do like purees and stuff as separate meals. So, oh, brilliant! We can see them.
Is that sharing? Is that working?
Yeah, lovely job. Well done. Beautiful.
So is that sort of half and half? It's not starting in the right place though, which is possibly what's it coming up with?
We've got some kind of nuggety breadcrumb coated thing.
Yeah. Sorry, that's come up at the end. It's gone back to front.
Oh.
1 second. Sorry about this, guys.
Oh, yeah, honestly, don't feel under pressure. We're quite happy to chat away. Let's have a look what else is in the chat. Vegan. I'm vegan but cook omnivorous meals for my kids. Youngest won't eat anything that has a shade of green unless I hide veggies in sauces. So maybe a bit of veggie loading like you were talking about there. Brilliant. Veggie kids, your kids will actually eat brackets, hopefully. That's what we can see.
Yes, perfect. Okay.
Right.
Right. Okay, so yeah, so that's what I'm covering today. And what I'm going to click along, hopefully now you can see some pictures of food. So this is kind of how I would present. What I mean by serving things family style is rather than sort of plating up for your child, it seems really obvious, but putting everything on the table in different dishes and letting them explore for themselves. And it means you can easily adapt meals because you can keep sort of the bigger flavors to the side. So for adults and stuff, you can have like the chili on the side. And again, this also goes for a seasoning as well. Get used to adding it at the end. So when you're laying your sort of table like this as well, and you're letting your children sort of explore and have the autonomy over what they're eating. And I think that's especially true if you've got sort of recent changes to your diet as well. If things are seeming new, if there's things on the table that they're not used to, you don't want it to be overwhelming. So what I tend to always do is think about what I consider safe food. So on this particular image that I've put up, my kids always love cucumber and carrot. So I'd always put it on the plate, on the table. They don't really like roast vegetables, which are in one of the other dishes. So I put that on, and it wasn't sort of part of the meal. It just sort of let them sort of go for it. In the event they didn't eat it, but they did eat loads of the other stuff on the table. So I think it just makes it feel sort of safer. And again, another thing that I like to do are things like butter bowls like this. You can either plate them up so nothing is touching, so then it's easy to navigate, or you can put the different components on the table, and that's a great thing for lunch. So you can think about sort of what your carb or your grain is. Think about sort of your protein. That can be things like beans, hummus, tofu, cheese, or eggs, or something like that. And then as sort of many different sort of vegetables as possible. And then for you as well, to keep it sort of exciting, have a nice ziggy dressing. I know someone had commented that the difficulty is more like their husband's not wanting to eat things. So that's when sort of, you know, put something on the table like some kimchi or sort of stronger flavors. So you're adapting. This is quite sort of simple food really, but you can sort of jazz it up with all the extra bits, which sort of brings me sort of neatly into the next part, which is I love toppings and I always use them for everything. And I think this is an extension of sort of family style. And it's about thinking whenever you're sort of presenting a dish, thinking about what toppings you can add to it. Especially if you're vegetarian, toppings aren't just a way of enticing in sort of more hesitant eaters. They're a brilliant way to add sort of variety. I think you might have heard and stuff, if you're vegetarian, things like iron and proteins are not necessarily as readily available when they're in plant-based forms. Often vegetarian plant-based proteins are incomplete, which means you need to sort of eat a wider variety of them to get a complete protein, whereas something like meat or a dairy product is a complete protein. So that's why, so if you're having toppings, things like adding, I'm just going to click along. So like I would, for instance, a lentil curry or a dal like this, if you're serving it alongside some yogurt or some like nuts and seeds, you've instantly sort of added in extra protein and extra fats, which is really important on a vegetarian diet as well. And then additionally as well, I think to help maximize your iron conversion on a vegetarian diet, you've got some fresh vitamin C. And again, toppings are a really great way of doing that. And obviously, it's not just for the nutrition. Like your kids, well, my kids, I know, they love putting the toppings on. They love sort of getting involved. And I think it's another way of just making what potentially can be sometimes for kids quite a more challenging meal. Like I always consider things like curries or chilies or something that's quite sort of bean and sauce heavy is a bit more challenging for my children to sort of readily accept, and they're normally a little bit more hesitant. But if I put toppings, lots of different rice and breads and stuff on the side, they're a lot more likely to sort of pile in and sort of take bits and try different bits. So curries are obviously brilliant to do that with, and then also Mexican food and chilies and stuff really lend themselves to that as well. So this is actually a recipe from my new book, which is sweet potato tostadas, and then I serve them with essentially just loads of toppings. So you've got black bean dips, like yogurts, avocados, sort of lime again, and sweet corn and stuff. And I think it's just about sort of making things interactive and thinking about all the different sort of nutrition points that you can sort of hit as well. And another thing I think that's important is if you are trying to reduce your dairy as well, have a real think about what it is. I'm a sucker for always wanting to add cheese to everything. But actually, if you think about what it is your taste is you're trying to sort of achieve with the cheese, it's generally that sort of like real savory sort of umami richness. And actually things like nutritional yeast or toasted nuts and seeds will also give you that hit. So it's all about just varying things up and just thinking about where you can get these stronger flavors. And I think, again, if we're talking about something for all the family as well, and I know, again, it's this sort of serving things, think about the family. So this is obviously for children, having the tomatoes and the avocado, but for adults, you've got fresh chili, you've got loads of chili sauces. Sort of condiments can really help make your food sort of work for the whole family. And also as well, and I completely appreciate as well, not everyone is always going to sit down and have an actual family meal. I don't myself. We eat different dinner at different times in the evening because my husband isn't home until the kids are in bed generally. So it's not necessarily all about sitting and eating together. For me, it's just about, I don't want to be cooking sort of 2 or 3 different meals. So essentially one of them I'm just heating back up. So, but that's still family style. So the next thing I'm going to just talk about is veggie loading. And I think that one is a bit more tricky because I know we've definitely had a comment down where someone's saying about hiding vegetables. So I think heading that off at the beginning, I don't consider veggie loading or sort of blending vegetables into things necessarily as hiding. I'm really honest with my children about what has gone into their food. They know what's in there. So we always talk about what we're doing in vegetables. So for instance, I use spinach and green a lot. I'm just going to click along. Oh, this is actually a sauce. I use vegetables as a base to lots of things to give lots of different flavour. So for instance, sweet potato, pumpkin and packed carrots I'll often use in something like a tomato sauce to sweeten it. Like traditionally you'd put in, probably depending on the tomatoes, a little bit of sugar to offset the acidity. And you can do that with sort of sweet potato and pumpkin and carrot. And then it's just giving it this extra depth of nutrition as well. And obviously like celery and onions always go in tomato sauce anyway. So you're sort of packing in all these vegetables, and I don't consider that hiding them. Yes, I know lots of people call that like a hidden vegetable sauce, but for me, that's not. You're using vegetables to naturally enhance. So this picture here is actually a sauce that I do for my kids' loaves, which is actually cheap mac and cheese. And the base of that is potato, carrot, and basically any other sort of orange vegetable, and either blended with a little handful of grated cheese if you are not vegan, or if you're vegan, you can blend it with a handful of cashew nuts and nutritional yeast. And that's just sort of like, that is a 10-minute, instant 10-minute meal that I haven't actually met a child yet who doesn't eat that, but I'm always happy to be challenged on that if you want to introduce it to one of your children who you think might not like it. So yeah, now I'm just going to talk. So I think someone mentioned their kids don't like anything green, and I think that is quite common. Do always often hear of kids not wanting to eat green things. We eat lots of I would say, green food, but my children are not into traditional sort of like greens. I think it can be quite a challenging texture for them. So if I put out a plate of spinach, I wouldn't necessarily expect any of them to get overexcited by that. But what we do have is a lot of things like green smoothies, green lollies, especially at the moment in this weather, and sort of things like green pancakes. And I think if your child is struggling with greens, what might be a nice starting point is maybe starting with something sweeter and a bit more of a treat and getting them used to the colours. So I'm a big sort of fan of, I use beetroot a lot as well in colouring to make things really bright pink. We've got some, yeah, so that's a beetroot lolly that we make a lot as well. And it just makes things really bright. So my children are used to having lots of bright colours in their food and lots of pinks and lots of greens. And I think that maybe helps as well, sort of get used to this idea that you're eating loads of different colours, eating the rainbow in quite sort of a more safe environment. And I've obviously shared as well, like some beetroot brownies, which we've been obsessed with making at the moment. I wouldn't necessarily say they are healthy, but they are really delicious. And my eldest, who isn't really into beetroot at all, gets really excited by these, and he's like, "Are you using those beetroots to make those brownies again, please?" So I think it's just sort of, yeah, just sort of thinking about using colour within what are sort of traditionally safe foods and using them as a base. And that can be a nice way of sort of creatively introducing your children to veg. And I think just coming back to that hiding as well, like do what makes you feel comfortable. I think a lot of people do hide and they don't tell their children. And I think you're doing that more for you than anyone else, because I think you're concerned, or we all get concerned about our children and want to maximize their nutrition and want them to eat as much sort of vegetables and nutritious food as possible. So I think that's a call for you to make. I'm not going to sit and say, oh, you shouldn't do that. But it's also, I think, depending on your child, it's nice to have that conversation about what's going in and making sort of they are understanding what they're eating and understanding that it's delicious because it's got vegetables in it. But obviously that is completely your call. And if you think if you feel more comfortable not doing that, that would be up to you. And then the last thing I was going to talk about as well is introducing new flavors in a sort of safe environment. And I don't sort of mean in like a padded room. What I'm thinking is don't change too much if you've got a hesitant eater, and like try and keep elements familiar. Like for me, myself as well, I get a vegetable bag. So throughout the year, naturally, my vegetables change. So we don't have, so I think, especially if you're sort of eating more sustainably, I think that is an issue, like, because you're talking about seasonal food, is how if you've got children basically like things that they're familiar with. So the more they eat something, the more they probably feel more comfortable around it, and that becomes their favorite food. So if you're eating seasonally and you're noticing your vegetables changing throughout the year, I think you naturally have to become a bit more sort of adept at working out what's a safe sort of way of feeding stuff. So for me, for my children, I know my eldest loves pastry, and I can basically put anything in a pie and he'll happily eat it. So we tend to do that, and I use a lot of greens in pies because greens, as I said before, are quite challenging for him, and I can use any kind of greens that I get throughout the year in a pie. And I'm not trying to change too much. I'm not going to try and make him love greens for what they are. I'm just happy that he really enjoys them in this environment. And I think that's the same for like something like pasta. That can be a really nice, if your child likes pasta, it's a really nice way to get them sort of started on different foods. And I think especially if you're thinking about changing your diet to become more vegetarian, which might mean you're eating a lot more like pulses and lentils, which I think lots of children can be a bit more hesitant about. Something like a lentil bolognese is a great starting point. You can maybe blend it to begin with and then gradually introduce a bit more texture as they get used to it. I just think going straight in and expecting them, if they've not previously eaten sort of a very vegetable and pulse sort of heavy diet, can be a bit overwhelming. So it's about sort of just understanding that you don't need to change everything at once and just sort of going gradually. And so I think I've got one last picture here. This is sort of an example of that. I quite often put sort of a breadcrumb on a vegetable. This is cauliflower in this picture. And I think the breadcrumb becomes a familiar thing for the children. Even if the sort of vegetable is something they have been quite hesitant over before, they're more likely to try it when it's in a crumb. And we'll sort of obviously talk about what's in there. and they know that that is a vegetable, but it can just make it sort of a bit more relaxing at the meal time. And obviously, I always serve things with a dip. My children really love dips, especially things like a satay dip. And again, that becomes like the safe part of the food, which makes them sort of more inclined to try the other parts. So I think essentially that's basically what I had to say about that, sort of getting your kids to eat veg. And I guess it's not, there's no, I'm afraid, sort of like hidden sort of secret code that will work. It's all about sort of working out what works for you and your family and just trying different things. And I think it's about sort of staying relaxed, making sure there's lots of sort of opportunity for them to sort of choose and pick what they want, and sort of maxing out the nutrition by using sort of toppings and lots of different dishes. I hope you found this helpful. I'm going to sort of look at some of the questions now. Jen, is that
brilliant? Thanks, Rachel. That's amazing. One question I want to ask, just looking at that photo there, breadcrumbs. Like I've tried making my own by, you know, blitzing up stale bread and things like that, but it's always quite soggy. Like what am I doing wrong?
Well, actually, I often use, so this is breadcrumbs, and I use a mix of quinoa flakes as well. And I don't know, they seem to make it much crunchier. Or if I breadcrumb and then put the breadcrumbs in the freezer, then when I use them, they seem to be crispier. Because I think sometimes when you in a mixer, like you wouldn't know. Yeah, like often when you do it in a mixer, like in a NutriBullet, I think it heats it up quite a lot, and they feel quite soggy when they first come out. So I would do that, then put it into the freezer, and then use it at a later date.
And do you do the whole kind of egg, flour, breadcrumb thing, or do you?
No, so actually recently I've been doing a lot more. I do a vegan egg wash, which is just a cup of flour and a cup of plant-based milk, and you just mix it together, and then you can just dip things in, and they stick really, really well. And there's not the same, I think it's less that sort of sloopy, gloopy thing of an egg. So it just like breadcrumbs really well.
I end up with like, you know, my hands just covered.
Yeah. So I've been using the vegan one just because it's so much easier.
And so would parboil those chunks of cauliflower first, or?
I don't parboil them, no. I just go raw, dip them in the vegan egg mix, roll them in some breadcrumbs, bake for half an hour.
Oh, brilliant.
With a tiny bit of olive oil over them. And they really are crispy. Like, cause the first time I did it, I was like, oh, they're going to be soggy. And they're not, they're really crispy. I don't know whether it's the quinoa flakes, but I think ground almonds as well might give you an extra crisp if you wanted to. What sort of
ratio do you do of breadcrumbs to quinoa or almonds?
I normally do 50-50 breadcrumbs and quinoa.
Okay. Cool.
It's flakes.
Yeah. So just looking at the questions here, Claire said, can somebody or are you able to go through how to freeze vegetables when they're chopped and prepped, and sort of what is blanching? She has dyspraxia and so buys a lot of pre-prepped veg, but it's always in plastic. And I guess if there are some easy tips for sort of prepping your own veg that can then be frozen.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's a great one to do, actually. I haven't done it myself, but I keep meaning to, of people almost like freezing an instant like sofrito mix. So chopped onion, chopped carrot and chopped celery, just sort of ready to go. Like just finely chop it and then keep it either in, if you've got like a reusable freezer bag that you use, or just in a plastic pot, and then just go. So don't pre-cook it beforehand, just chop it raw and put it in. I also as well often keep all my odds and ends in a bag as well in the freezer, always with the intention to make stock. It doesn't always happen. It just sort of like gets bigger and bigger. But I think that's a nice way of reducing waste as well, and having it sort of all on hand. And when you actually do it, you feel great.
Yeah, and I've done that before, and then just chucked it in the slow cooker overnight. You know, of odds and ends, and then the thing I learned was you do need to be careful about the kind of cabbage ratio you put in there, otherwise it does just kind of smell and taste of cabbage. So
yeah, right, good tip.
But if people don't have the knife skills, or can you just sort of roughly blitz things in a mixer and then
yeah, I think depending if you've got a food processor, totally. I think if you've got one with all those different attachments, definitely just shove it through it and go. Yeah.
And blanching, just explain that term for people who aren't familiar with it.
That normally just means sort of like basically put it in water for a bit, I think.
Yeah,
boiling water.
Yeah,
so you're not fully boiling it, you're sort of almost just putting it in and then running it under cold water again.
Yeah, kind of a flash boil, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, I hope that was helpful, Claire. Susan says she's really busy with food textures, particularly things like mushrooms and beans. Any suggestions on how to hide textures when cooking?
I think are these questions, can I see them? Is that
If you on the bottom,
yeah, I've got it.
That ask a question. If you click on that, then you can see the questions on.
I suppose it depends sort of how much is it the texture? Is it the whole texture, or is it like just in general? Because obviously things like beans always look to me lend themselves really well to dips and stuff. So obviously you've got hummus, but you can make any sort of dip out of any different beans and sort of black bean dips, and when they're blended.
I wanted to make hummus, but we didn't have any chickpeas, so I did it with butter beans, and it was great. Yeah,
and you can do really nice butter bean mash as well, actually, and that might sort of make the texture more palatable. I think mushrooms are a hard one. I know so many people who struggle with mushrooms, so I wondered, but again, I guess you can blend them, or I don't know whether you're better if they're really finely chopped as well. You can make something like a taco meat, really finely chopped mushrooms, or like almost like a bolognese as well, and that might be more palatable because I know that they can be, I like them when they're really slimy, but I know some people struggle with that a lot.
And I don't know if it's in your book or somewhere else, I've seen someone do like mushroom meatballs, so kind of chop them up really fine and sort of make them into like a presumably mixed with beans.
Oh yeah, there is. I've got a lentil ball in my book which has got mushrooms in as well. Yeah. So
I want to try that one on my mushroom refuser and see if he will eat it. The best. Oh, this is Nicola's son is watching, and he's 10, and I'm not sure if this is a comment or a question. If I had a child when I'm an adult, what are the best greens for vitamins A and B?
Okay, I'm going to, I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't know all the nutrition stuff. I've got in my book, things that are covered because I had a nutritionist that I worked with who wrote nutrition sections for me. So I'm just going to consult that and see if it's in there, because I don't want to just basically give advice. So I don't think, I don't know, actually. I'm sorry, because they're not in there specifically, because I think on the vegetarian diet we pulled out sort of the vitamins that were sort of more crucial, which are like things like the B12, which is the one you often get from animal products, and things like vitamin C. So I'm afraid I don't know vitamin A or B.
I think the general advice, isn't it, is to kind of eat the rainbow and eat as widely as you can.
And I think and just generally, I think ultimately, like things like leafy greens have just got so much goodness in them. Like really focus on them, and also sort of like basically just eating the rainbow. And I think the bigger variety you can eat, the better. Because especially on a vegetarian or plant-based diet, you just having that variety means you're more likely to hit all those nutritional requirements.
Yeah, definitely. We've recently discovered our 3-year-old is gluten intolerant, and the go-to previously was, toast and pasta and things. Have you got any? You've got lots of sort of alternative flours and things in your book, haven't you?
Yeah. So I think, also I think just looking at the pastas, there are so many like sort of protein pastas and stuff now on the market. I've used lentil pasta a lot, which tastes great. It is a bit more of an acquired sort of taste and texture, but I think they're definitely worth a look, especially for a 3-year-old, and you don't want them to give up on pasta. And I think they're nice as well because you're adding in this extra sort of protein dimension as well to their diet. And things like toast as well. You can use things like polenta chips in the place of toast as a dipping thing. And also you can have a go with making sort of different. I probably wouldn't make bread. I'm not sure if I dare do bread with gluten-free flour, but things like flatbreads and stuff might be easier to do because they've not got much of a rise. But yeah, I think that is. But I think there are lots of also good gluten-free breads on the market as well. So looking at them, and again, things like, so I just the coated veg that I showed in the last one. You don't have to make that with breadcrumbs. You could make that totally with quinoa flakes or ground almonds, and that would be completely gluten-free as well. And it's still got this nice little crunch to it.
Amazing. And Claire, I think, had put a comment higher up about, she tried ditching all dairy and meat in one go and ended up in hospital. And obviously, I think especially with kids, I think, personally, I'd feel quite confident, being solely vegetarian with them. I think I would worry a bit more about the kids in terms of make sure they are getting, if they were vegan, getting the right sort of nutrition and stuff into them. And I know you said you're not a nutritionist, but is there anything particular you keep at the forefront of your mind when you're doing more plant-based stuff with your kids?
Yeah, I think so. The big ones, I think, especially if you're plant-based, is really thinking about Obviously the calcium, and I think there are lots of sources as well, because you can get them from like sort of like sesame seeds and almonds and things like this. It's probably more the sort of lesser known things that you might want to think about on a vegan diet. So like the B12, which you can't really get from anything from a sort of plant-based product other than sort of fortified stuff. It's found in dairy, eggs and animal products. So it's about, I think, looking at this is where the fortification comes really useful, and I hadn't actually given that much thought until I wrote the book, how useful that is. So when you're looking at plant-based milks, probably for children, I'd always avoid the organic ones mostly, because especially if I was vegan, just because the organic tend not to be fortified. And I think if you're like, if you was part of a very, so if I was giving my kid cow's milk and then plant milk as well, I might sort of think about the organic one. But if that was just, they were being purely plant-based, I'd look at the fortified, and you want to sort of look out for the amount of protein and fat and iodine that it's fortified with, and all the different vitamins and stuff. So I think you can get that from a lot. Iodine is another one as well, I guess, that is hard to get. So again, that's looking at the fortification. And then omegas as well, it might be something. And I would actually probably always recommend, if you are plant-based, completely plant-based, or perhaps if you're vegetarian and your child has dairy and egg allergies, to speak with a dietitian about which supplements may be necessary. It's always a bit complex, because if your child's breastfeeding and stuff, it's like it becomes a less obvious thing, and what milk they're having and stuff. So that's why I think you need to see a dietitian who would look at the specific sort of diet and your lifestyle.
Yeah, definitely. If there are any other questions, guys, get them into the chat box quickly, because Rachel's, you've got 3 kids, haven't you, who are 5, 3 and 1. Yes, and your husband's working full time from home, so you've like are they sort of tied up in a corner somewhere? Or
I think the TV is almost 100% certain to be on right now.
So yeah, can you just remind us where we can find you online, and give your book a little plug?
So I'm Little Veggie Eats on Instagram. Do you want me to? Should I put that in?
Put that into the chat box. Chat box, yeah. Well, I can do that for you actually, if it's hard. It's because I find typing and well done.
That's okay. I said So that's me, and then this is my book as well. So obviously it says it's weaning, but it is for the whole family, because everything I do is cooked for the whole family, but just with all those adaptations that I talked to. And it's basically just kind of like trying to fling as many different sort of tastes and ingredients at a meal as possible, and hope that people start exploring. And
sorry, I missed this comment earlier. It's hard to get a large family of 7 with 5 kids and 2 adults to eat all the same dishes. But I guess what you were saying about having that sort of smorgasbord, or that almost sort of tapas style of people can take what they want. Yeah, I think so. And just thinking about, I think really think about those toppings, because they seem like such a little thing, and they are quite easy, because it could just be nuts and seeds or just some chopped tomatoes and things like that. But they're easy to sort of put onto the table. And I think especially if you've got some children that are more hesitant than others, once they see something a bit more familiar on there, they might be more inclined to sort of come in and eat and then try other things. But I do appreciate it is really difficult. And I'm not going to say my children all eat exactly the same food every time. And sometimes I'll put out this lovely spread of different foods, and one of them will just eat grated cheese. But then, that's fine. They've still been exposed to vegetables, that means. And I've been raving about the book, but one of the things I really like is like the different substitutions you've put in there, and like the different, if you have got gluten intolerances or dairy, there's so many different options and so many different ways of squeezing all that in. So thank you so much. That's all right. Thank you. You're joining us again for the food waste panel, aren't you? Yes, that's right. Yeah, brilliant. So really, I would love to say when that was, but my brain is mush, so I don't know. Tomorrow at 4. Tomorrow at 4. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. And I'll see you very soon. Take care.